The Lebanese capital has been hit just in the last hour by another Israeli airstrike. It is the second day of Israeli attacks on Lebanon, which have so far killed over 550 people. Israel's military said it hit the southern suburbs of Beirut in an attempt to kill a senior Hezbollah commander. An F-35 jet carried out the attack, which has killed at least one person. A multi-story building, several cars and motorbikes have been damaged in this latest strike. These are the latest pictures from southern Lebanon, filmed within the last few hours. The Israeli military says it's carried out hundreds of attacks on Monday and Tuesday. Most of the strikes have been in southern Lebanon, but these have now expanded into the east.
As we promised, the financial situation will come into effect immediately. Another important fact is that many of the victims who are in a critical condition have improved. In addition to that, we're also doing our best to accommodate all the victims who require long-term medical attention.
Well, hospitals in southern Lebanon and the capital Beirut are overwhelmed. The health ministry has instructed staff to postpone non-emergency surgeries. Health facilities were already struggling to treat thousands of people injured when Israel detonated explosives and pagers and walkie-talkies in a series of coordinated attacks just last week. Hezbollah, too, has fired a barrage of rockets into northern Israel. The group says it's targeted military bases, airfields, and an explosives factory 60 kilometers from the border. Israel says the Iron Dome missile defense system has intercepted most of the rockets. We can bring in Raymond Murphy. He's a human rights lawyer and professor of law at the University of Galway. Now, Raymond, good of you to join us. You also served as a UN peacekeeper with UNIFIL in Lebanon. And I want to ask you what you make of what is happening at the moment in southern Lebanon specifically, because you were, as I said, a former peacekeeper there.
Yeah, the situation for the peacekeepers, similar to the situation for civilians in the area, is quite precarious. They're caught between two warring factions at this stage, or between a conflict that has emerged between the Israeli forces and Hezbollah in South Lebanon. And the situation over the last couple of days has escalated very seriously. And the UN peacekeepers, we must recall, have a very limited mandate. It's enshrined in Resolution 1701, which was adopted in 2006. And if you look at the terms of the resolution, actually many issues raised in the resolution are quite unrealistic. And one of them was actually to ensure that Hezbollah would withdraw from an area between the Lebanese-Israeli border and the Litani River to ensure that it would become demilitarized. But in order to do that, the UN forces needed the cooperation of Hezbollah and the cooperation of the Lebanese armed forces and indeed that of the Israelis. And they are reliant on cooperation in order to implement the mandate. They don't have the means or capacity, and I would argue they don't have the mandate to try to enforce a settlement. And so they are now actually involved in the protection of the force itself, ensuring that they can carry out minimal amount of their duties while also ensuring the safety of all the peacekeepers. And they have a responsibility towards the local population. In 2017, a comprehensive protection of civilian implementation plan was enacted. Fortunately, many civilians have left the most immediately threatened area, but as in all conflicts, those that are most marginalized and most disenfranchised and the poorest and most vulnerable are left behind. So UNIFIL has a responsibility to deliver humanitarian aid and try to the extent possible to ensure their safety. But right now, it's not able to perform its mandate. It's not functioning properly. And the most it can do is observe and report, which of itself is quite important, because you will appreciate, as Al Jazeera, how important it is to have independent reports from areas. Well, the UN forces are the eyes and ears of the international community. It can tell us firsthand what's happening in the area, but they will also be primed and ready to help facilitate a resolution of the current round of conflict and hostilities, because ultimately it will end. Unfortunately, the Israelis are not seeking a political solution to the current impasse, and therefore the civilians are suffering, the UN force is rendered impotent, and the short-term outlook is very, very dire for all of the Lebanese people.
Indeed. You were a former UN peacekeeper. What is your understanding of the current UN team that is there, and what exactly are they doing as the situation there escalates?
Well, to be honest, I mean, since 1978, when the first UN peacekeeping mission was deployed, it always had what we would call a traditional peacekeeping role. In other words, it wasn't a peace enforcement role. It wasn't a so-called stabilization mission. It wasn't there to take on the parties, to use force to enforce the mandate. It was there to implement a mandate with the cooperation of the parties to the conflict. Since 2006, when there was a major outbreak of hostilities and Israel went back into South Lebanon and conducted an operation over a period of about 5 or 6 weeks, as a consequence, the UN adopted what was quite a controversial mandate, because the mandate seemed to suggest that it was the UN's responsibility to demilitarize and disarm Hezbollah. And this, of course, is exactly what the Americans and the Israelis wanted. But in reality, that was always going to be an impossible task. But they are there on the ground now. Those that are not immediately conducting observation missions and reporting on what's happening will, to a large extent, be sheltering in bunkers. And indeed, there has been a tradition of sheltering civilians to the extent possible in the same bunkers that the UN forces occupy, in order to be able to give some degree of protection. But it's not possible to conduct patrols and other normal military activities for peacekeepers while the current conflict rages. So they're in a standby position, merely reporting and observing what's happening.
Raymond, how worried are you about the Israeli aggression we are seeing in southern Lebanon, not only for those living on both sides of the blue line that we've been referring to, but for the wider region?
Yeah, I think it's extremely dangerous. It seems to me that the Israeli government has launched this operation, of course, to militarily defeat Hezbollah, but also to provoke Hezbollah to respond in even more forceful terms. And as a consequence, possibly to bring Iran into the conflict, as well as the Houthis in Yemen, which would force the hand of the United States. The United States has already come to the defense of Israel. So if the situation escalates and Hezbollah fall for what is essentially a trap that's being set by the Israelis and responds very forcefully, and the situation escalates and draws in Iran and other regional powers, then the United States will also step in defense of Israel. And we have a situation that's already out of control. But that could create an even more significant regional conflict, the consequences of which are unknown to us at this time. So it's really important to put pressure on the Israelis to cease the current round of hostilities. And the only country that can really do that, is the United States. The European Union has some leverage, but nothing like that of the United States. But Israel knows that this is an election year, and that essentially the American president and the current administration is impotent until after the November elections. And then we don't even know what the outcome of that will be, because that could have a very significant impact also on the region.
OK, thank you for your thoughts. Raymond Murphy, human rights lawyer and professor of law at the University of Galway, also previously a UN peacekeeper with UNIFIL in Lebanon, speaking to us there from Ireland. Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.